Story 1. The night someone got in. I was staying at a friend's house in a quiet residential part of Scotland. There was nothing special about the area. It was just rows of houses, parked cars, and the constant grey sky. His parents went away for the weekend, which meant there was just the two of us. We spent most of that evening gaming, eating takeaway, and recalling events that happened in high school. It's important to mention that we were 20 years old at the time of this event. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. My friend went upstairs first, but I stayed downstairs a little bit longer, scrolling on my phone in the living room where I planned to sleep. The house was completely silent, where the only noise that was audible was the kitchen clock. Randomly, I heard a sound. At first, I thought it was just a random noise, maybe the floorboards. But then it happened again, a soft creak. I remember pausing and listening properly. My friend was upstairs, and I could hear faint movement, so whatever I was hearing surely was not him. I stood up slowly and walked towards the hallway. Living room light didn't quite reach the end, so the corridor was almost completely dark. That's when I saw it. The front door was slightly opened. I knew for a fact that it was previously locked. We'd both checked it earlier on the night. In that moment, I felt that sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. I crept up the stairs, trying to keep my voice normal. I entered my friend's room and asked him if he went back outside and forgot to shut the front door. He looked visibly concerned and said that he went outside, but was sure they shut the back door behind him. I told him what I saw, and then at that moment we both went silent and looked down, as we heard what sounded like footsteps downstairs. It sounded slow and heavy, like someone trying not to be heard but failing. We both tiptoed into the hall, and I peered from the banister into the living room below. I let out a gasp, as the sight was truly horrific. There was a random man standing in the middle of the living room. He looked to be around his mid-40s with a slight build and appeared to be taller than 6 foot. He must have heard me turn round and looked straight up the stairs. I dove behind the banister and motioned for my friend to be quiet and to follow me into his room. Despite him not seeing the man, he could tell by my body language and facial expressions that there was something very wrong. We went into his room and locked the door. That's when I told him what I saw. He grabbed his phone and quietly phoned his parents, who then instructed him to phone the police. As we were on the line with the operator, we heard footsteps coming from the stairs. At that moment, I felt as if my world was flipped upside down. They continued until we were on the same floor as us. We both looked at each other as we heard the other doors begin to open until the footsteps made their way to directly outside the room we were in. At that point, everything just gets fuzzy. I remember trying not to shit myself as we were anticipating the door handle moving, and it did. As it moved, the lock restricted it, thankfully. Whoever was outside began to scream in response to this, not even words, just sounds, and began to ram his shoulder into the door. That snapped us out of our paralysis. We both agreed that we needed to jump from the window to avoid being confronted with this psychopath. He went first, but as I was climbing out the window, the door busted open and the man stepped inside of the room. I didn't even look back. I just jumped into the bushes below, slightly hurting my ankle. Me and my friend both then made our way to the front of the house through the side and waited for the police. We took cover behind some bins. 5 agonising minutes later, the police arrived. 2 police officers entered the house and 2 stayed with us. Of course, the cliche thing, when police officers came out of the house, they said that they found nothing, but the back door was wide open, which meant they escaped from there. They waited with us until my friend's parents returned, and we explained the situation. That realistically there was nothing they could do, so they left and told us to come back if we were to hear anything. I guess the moral of the story is always make sure the doors are locked. Story 2. There's someone in my room. I was babysitting a friend's younger sibling one evening while he was out. Nothing unusual, I'd done it before. The house is quiet as it usually is in this safe suburb in central Scotland. My friend's brother was upstairs playing on his Xbox at 8:30 at night, whilst I was downstairs watching TV. As I was instructed, I went upstairs to put him to sleep at this time. Around 9 p.m, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Small, slow, weak steps. My friend's brother came down and stood in the doorway of the living room. He didn't look scared exactly, he just looked unsettled. Then he said something that I struggled to digest. He told me, "There's someone in my room." I smiled a bit, thinking it was a part of his imagination. Kids that age usually see things. I said back to him that there isn't. I told him it's just the house settling. He shook his head. He said they only come out when I'm lying in bed. That made me pause again. Regrettably, I dismissed him despite being unsettled myself by what I was hearing. Another 15 minutes passed as I was watching one of my favourite animes. Again, I heard footsteps descending from the top of the stairs. It was my friend's brother again, who repeated the same claim as he did before. At this point, I felt a mixture of concern and a desire to show him that there was nothing, so I went back with him to check. I turned on the hallway light and entered his room. I checked under his bed, behind the door, inside the wardrobe, specifically remembering to close it. There was nothing. Completely normal. I told him again that it was fine. At this point, I took him downstairs to get a glass of water so they can de stress, and after that, I walked back to his room with him. But as I was leaving the room the second time, I noticed something odd. The wardrobe door wasn't fully closed, just slightly open. I was sure I'd closed it. That's when I heard something. A soft tap from inside the wardrobe. Just one. It was like knuckles on wood. I froze. I told my friend's brother to follow me downstairs, and I pretended to change my mind about allowing him to stay up late. I didn't tell him what I heard. I discreetly phoned my friend to ask if he was meant to have any other friends staying over. I know this sounds stupid in hindsight, but I desperately tried to convince myself that this cannot be happening to me. And my friend informed me that it was just supposed to be me and his brother. Downstairs I tried to act normal, but I was paying attention to everything now. Every sound of the house felt louder. That's when I heard the most catastrophic sound in all of my life. I heard the closet door opening from upstairs as it let out an ear-piercing squeak. We both looked at each other in disbelief. Slowly, the child whispered very calmly, "That's him." I grabbed my phone and tried to play it off cool as I took his hand and went into the ground floor toilet and locked the door. At that moment, I phoned the police and said there was an intruder in the house whilst telling my friend's brother that we were only playing a game. I said that the police would take 10 minutes to get there. Suddenly, the most horrifying moment in my life happened as I heard footsteps from above, running down the stairs and out of the front door. All happened in the blink of an eye. We waited until police officers entered the house and identified themselves. They told me that the front door was open when they arrived. They conducted a search of the house, and unsurprisingly, nothing turned up. I phoned my friend and explained the situation. His parents were further up north in Scotland and couldn't make it back that night, so he came to the house instead. The police waited until he arrived, then told us to call back if anything happened. I stayed the night to make my friend feel more comfortable, and that was the last we ever heard of it. Years later, there's been no updates, and that man has never came back. So I guess this has become just one of those personal stories that you can tell when there's a social gathering. Story 3, the one who followed me home. This happened when I was 19. I attended a concert in Glasgow, a packed venue, loud music, flashing lights, the usual chaos. It was the kind of night you don't really think too much about, you just exist in the moment. I went alone, which wasn't unusual for me, as in that stage of my life, I didn't have a lot of friends. I left the venue late, around closing time, when the streets were still busy but thinning out. At first, everything was fine. People were walking in their groups, there was taxis pulling away, and music still faintly echoing. But after around 10 minutes of walking, I noticed something. There was someone behind me. Not close enough to be obvious, but close enough for me to acknowledge that they were there. I noticed that they would adjust their pace to match mine. I turned slightly, pretending to check my phone, and they did the same. That's when I started really paying attention. I crossed the road, and so did they. I stopped near a shop window, pretending to look inside, and they stopped further back, still watching me. At this point, I desperately tried to convince myself that this was a coincidence. In Glasgow, there is a lot of people after concerts. They go in the same direction, right? Well, it turns out that that wasn't the case. The streets got quieter, and I realised something uncomfortable. The person was still behind me. From where I was in the city centre, it would take approximately 25 minutes of walking to get to my house, and I didn't want to risk leading this creep to my house. I turned down a side street, thinking I could lose them, but when I got to the end and looked back, they were still there, closer now. I pulled out my phone and pretended to call someone. I said things out loud, louder than necessary. I heard the footsteps of the person behind me speed up. As I turned round, I was greeted with a grown man with his hands stretched towards me, directly behind me. Somehow, I still don't know how, I dodged and I began to run as fast as I possibly could. At first, I was just running aimlessly, just desperately trying to lose him. It felt like one of those life or death situations. But sadly, I made the worst choice in my life when I turned around to see if he was following me, and he was within an arm's length of reaching me. Just then, I turned into a street which had a group of young men walking who seen what was happening. A few of them started shouting and ran towards the man, which made him stop and retreat the other way. The men asked me if I was okay and even paid for a taxi home. I just want to say, if you're watching this, thank you. You saved my life that night. But that's how it ended. There was no point in trying to phone the police, in case anyone's wondering, as realistically, what can they do? My only message for those who go out at night time, whether to concerts, whether to nightclubs, is to always be amongst other people, and if necessary, get a taxi home. It is not worth gambling with your life in order to save an extra few pounds.